What's up, losers? Today I'm back with some more r/fatlogic hijinks. Checking out a couple of intriguing posts. Offering up whatever thoughts and observations I might have about them. And having as much fun as possible along the way. This is episode 106 in the fatlogic series. And I'm hungry for some more of that wacky fat acceptance goodness. So without further ado, let's get into it.
PSA, why I say fat, and don't use the words. Fat activists and advocates for fat acceptance use the word fat, both as a neutral descriptor for larger body sizes, and as an identity marker / way to create community. We don't use words because overweight implies a norm for all people. Over what weight? Obese has a strong negative connotation. Both words medicalize human diversity and body size. It's important to normalize fat.
This one should be relatively simple to respond to, because the issues with what it's saying border on the self-evident. I think I'll just use a numbered list for convenience. 1. I don't see how fat is a neutral descriptor, like people use fat as an insult all the time. They shouldn't, because it's mean and unproductive. But they certainly do, and I'd have to assume that fat people are more aware of this than anyone. So I don't see where this blindness to the negative connotations of fat is coming from. 2. Sure, obese does have a negative connotation. But as far as I can see, no more than fat, and more importantly, that's kind of the whole point. Like, it's an unhealthy medical condition. It's not supposed to be all sunshine and rainbows, haha. 3. Similarly, overweight, implying a norm for roughly how much people should weigh, is not incidental, it is the point of the term. If someone is overweight, they are outside the ideal healthy weight range for someone of their height. And using the term overweight brings this to their attention, so that they can take action before they progress to full-on obesity. 4. These terms do indeed serve to medicalize weight. Very observant, but once again, this is not an accident. Weight is something that affects one's health. And it is completely appropriate, and even necessary, to factor this into medical considerations. So pointing this out really doesn't invalidate the use of these terms whatsoever. And 5. No, it's not important to normalize fat, because being fat is unhealthy. And we should want people to be healthy, not normalize poor health. Do I want fat people to be shamed? Or bullied, or ostracized? Absolutely not. Fat people are human beings. And they deserve to be treated with respect and kindness like anybody else. But being fat is not just a harmless physical characteristic. It's dangerous, limiting, and completely avoidable. So let's not normalize fat. Let's, I don't know, help people lose weight, so that they can live the long, healthy, and happy lives that they deserve. You wouldn't have thought that this was a controversial stance on my part, would you? But here we are. Size. Moving on.
I'm saying this as a gay and trans person. Gay and trans people will literally go, even if these identities were a choice. It's still wrong to oppress us. And then turn to fat people who are facing immense oppression and say, you're making the choice to be fat. So, kind of your fault. Also keep in mind that, just like queerness, fatness is not something the average fat person chooses. Genetics, socioeconomic status, disabilities, and so much more determine fatness.
I'm fat, and people in school used to call me a cow, or wouldn't hang out with anyone who looked fat to them. Like, I can't help being heavy, any more than I can help being trans and gay, or being short. I exercise when I can. Try not to overeat, and I take it one day at a time. But I don't lose weight, because it's just something in my genetics. And people fail to remember that words hurt bad, and they're words that they use to hurt fat people like me. Those words never leave my mind. When I look in the mirror, I hate what I see. When I look at other people, I think, I wish I was strong like they are, holding their head up high, and not showing the pain of the words fatphobic people use. Or, they look freaking amazing, and I wish I looked like them. Do people not realize that the harmful words people use do affect people, that once they say something harmful, they can't ever unsay it? Because if they did realize it, and chose better words, the world would be a better, beautiful place. Not only do fat people face oppression through bullying, we also face wage gaps. Workplace harassment, job discrimination, are not protected by anti-discrimination laws. Our abuse is televised for entertainment. Shows like Biggest Loser, we're encouraged to mutilate our organs in order to conform to society's beauty standards. Weight loss surgeries. Fat children are taken into the foster care system purely for being fat. Medical discrimination. Fat people are not given the same quality healthcare as thin people. And so much more. Don't forget that when I say oppressed, I mean that we are oppressed in literally every way.
Wow, there's a whole lot to unpack here. I feel like this one is going to take a while, so I won't beat around the bush. Let's get right to these points. Starting from the top. The first section of the post defends fat people against the suggestion that being fat is a choice, and that this justifies their quote-unquote oppression, on two separate bases. I'll start with the second, because it just makes more sense that way. The poster argues that fat people do not just choose to be fat, and that genetics, socioeconomic status, disabilities, and so much more determine fatness. To this I will say that sure, being fat is not just a choice. I'm sure if fat people could push a button and become thin, most of them would do so. But that does not mean that being fat is totally outside of one's control either. Ultimately, a person's weight is the product not of a single, easy decision to be or not to be fat, but of a multitude of micro-decisions every day of their life, and the longer-term habits that these decisions constitute. You might not be able to just snap your fingers and make your belly go away, but you can choose not to have that slice of cake. You can choose to have a cheeseburger rather than a triple cheeseburger. You can choose to go for a walk rather than sitting in front of the TV. And you can choose to have a Diet Coke rather than a regular Coke, haha. So in light of all these areas in which one does have a choice, it seems to me that you're doing yourself a massive disservice by depriving yourself of all agency and embracing this kind of learned helplessness. As for the related point that it shouldn't matter whether being fat is a choice, because even if it were, that wouldn't justify oppression, I half agree and half disagree. On the one hand, sure, the fact that we can control our weight should not give anyone license to go out and bully, harass, or willfully discriminate against fat people. But on the other, a lot of the things that fat activists chalk up to fat oppression are really just the natural outcomes of being fat. And I don't see how it's helpful to obscure this fact. I'm sure there are real instances of medical neglect and workplace discrimination that fat people have to deal with. And I am happy to acknowledge this. But the reality is that poor health outcomes in fat people are overwhelmingly caused by obesity rather than doctor malpractice. And the diminished employability of fat people is not wholly attributable to fatphobia or anti-fat bias. Because, at the very least, being fat inevitably makes someone less mobile, and this is a distinct disadvantage in a wide range of workplace environments. All in all, irrespective of the fact that some people are assholes and treat fat people unfairly, it is clear that the best way to improve fat people's lives, especially in the short term, is not to dismiss the possibility of weight loss and campaign against fatphobia, but to accept responsibility for one's size, make the changes necessary to lose weight, and reap the rewards of no longer being obese. Sarah, that's my recommendation, haha. Moving on to the next chunk of the post. We have a reiteration of the notion that fat people have no choice but to be fat. And then we have more complaints about bullying and discrimination. Given that I've already responded to these points broadly, I'll just add a few further miscellaneous notes. 1. I actually agree with the post that The Biggest Loser was a terrible show. That should never have been made. If you watched the show and found some inspiration in it, then I'm happy for you. But the methods that the show used were unhealthy, exploitative, and even dangerous. I'm ambivalent on whether weight loss shows, in general, are positive for society. But either way, The Biggest Loser didn't do things right, and I wouldn't advise anyone to take it seriously. 2. Can we not call weight loss surgeries organ mutilation? They are legitimate procedures, with a clear medical purpose, beyond the desire to conform to society's beauty standards. Like, strictly speaking, we could call all kinds of surgeries organ mutilation. But we don't, because we understand that there is a distinction between medically necessary surgical interventions and arbitrary mutilation. There is no reason why this distinction should be neglected with regard to weight loss surgery, and I'm sick of having to call this manipulative use of language out. So give it a rest. And 3. As far as fat kids being taken into the foster care system goes, this is obviously not an ideal outcome, and it should be seen as something of a last resort. But if a child becomes dangerously obese, and their parents fail to address this, at a certain point I can see where such a measure might become necessary. I mean, children should be given the chance, wherever possible, to grow up healthily, and if their parents are feeding them in such a way as to preclude this, then it would be wrong to leave the child there to suffer. The needs of the child should always come first. And if parents are given the opportunity to clean up their act, and fail to do so, it's hardly surprising that the state would eventually step in. So basically, don't put your children on the Nikocado diet, and you'll probably be all right. Wow, that was a long one, wasn't it? There was just so much to talk about, and I didn't want to skip over the important points. I hope everyone is still with me, and that nobody drifted off halfway through my rambling. But if you did, we're back, haha. Let's move on to the next post.
Pride Month is like a version of Masked Singer. You never know which celebrity is gonna reveal themselves. But I wasn't gonna guess Rebel Wilson.
After her gaining weight specifically for roles, and then talking shit when she lost it, I am just not inclined to think well of her. No matter who she is dating. Glad she feels comfortable and safe. But that's it.
Her.
Haha, I don't have much to say about this one. I just think it's hilarious that the fat activists are still stewing about Rebel Wilson. Like, you'd think that the body acceptance crowd, of all people, would be cool with someone doing what they want with their body. But no, seeing their celebrity fat idols lose weight hits the fat acceptance community like a damn tsunami. And evidently, in the case of Rebel Wilson, the wounds have yet to heal. I guess it could be worse though. At least they still have Tess Holliday. What's my overall takeaway? I don't think I have one. Other than, stay salty, haha. Moving on.
Literally, I hate everything about this response. It's actually pathetic how fat-phobic you sound. Diabetes is something that people with any body type can have, and health is not an indication of sexiness. Also, the idea that you can know anything about anyone's health from just looking at their body is ridiculous. Health is also not an indication of worth as person. Medicine is a science, and science is done by humans who have biases. Science and medicine are not perfect, and scientific and medical facts are constantly shifting and being amended. I'm deeply sorry to you for having to deal with your internalized fat phobia and deep fear of ever being a fat person. Many fat people deal with eating disorders too, and your attitude and response to this ask are the kinds of things that can affect that. I'm not attempting to start discourse But I think you should really think before you start posting dumb shit.
Okay, so I haven't seen whatever it is that this post was responding to. So in fairness, it might make more sense if I had access to the original post as well. With that being said, wow, does this one jump around a lot. It really is the quintessential throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, fat acceptance rant. And what can I say? I don't find it compelling in the slightest. Like, instead of arguing for any of its constituent points with any conviction, the post just tosses something out there, fails to elaborate, and then moves on to the next thing, as if to overwhelm the reader through sheer volume, rather than through sound reasoning. When we take a closer look at the individual claims that comprise the post, this approach starts to make a kind of sense, because the points that the post uses to apparently make its case are mostly pretty obvious and unremarkable, but the conclusions that it reaches from them are a good deal more contentious. The most egregious of these is its implied dismissal of arguments based on science, through pointing out that science is imperfect, incomplete, and sometimes susceptible to bias in its practice. All of these are fair things to note, as a generalized commentary on science's limitations. But as a response to any particular scientific claim, they are basically meaningless, because if you want to dispute the findings of any given scientific study, you have to actually identify problems in that study's specific methodology. You can't just dismiss any science that you don't like based on the fact that science, writ large, is not always perfect, while accepting scientific findings that fit better with your preconceived ideas about the world. Because that's not critical thinking. It's just playing for a team. The post's insistence is that you can't know about someone's health just from looking at them, and that people with any type of body can have diabetes, are also not technically untrue, but the way that they are deployed is highly cynical and misleading. Like, maybe we can't tell what health issues someone might be dealing with just by observing that they're fat, but we can say, with confidence, that fat people are much more susceptible to a vast array of health conditions than thin people are. Pointing out that not every fat person will experience the same health troubles at any given point in time does not negate this troubling association. It only serves to obscure it, and that isn't helpful for anyone other than defensive fat activists, I guess. Similarly, noting that there are thin people with diabetes too is fair, and it's good to remind everyone that being thin does not exempt you from the need for a healthy diet. But using the existence of thin diabetics to distract from the powerful link between obesity and diabetes is manipulative and irresponsible. Being obese makes one much more likely to develop diabetes. This is just a fact. And if you, or someone you know, is in the obese weight range, it is a fact that should be setting off alarm bells for you. Because diabetes is no joke. It is a serious and often debilitating condition. And it is one that is completely avoidable for many of those who are currently on track to develop it. If we really care about fat people, and not just about fat activism, we should be shouting this from the rooftops. Because it is not too late to change. But after a few more years wasted on these pointless distractions, maybe it will be, and that would be a damn shame. Well, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed reading these posts with me, and that you got something out of my commentary. What do you think? Is it important to normalize fat? Are fat people oppressed in literally every way? Is Rebel Wilson a horrible person? Is health an indication of sexiness? Let me know in the comments. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, or I'll make you compete on The Biggest Loser against a bunch of angry fat activists. And your punishment for losing will be A year spent in solitary confinement. Reflecting on your own internalized fat phobia. Just kidding, haha. Anyway, catch you later.